Imagine you're a buff-as-hell Viking warrior, beard flowing in the wind, standing on a random beach holding a battle axe in one hand and a blueberry in the other, muttering, "Bro, where am I? And why are there so many grapes?" While the rest of the world was still debating if the Earth was square or shaped like a dumpling, and Christopher Columbus didn't even exist in his grandparents' imagination, these crazy Norsemen had already built ships and crossed the freezing ocean just to find a new spot to grab a drink. That's right, they found America. But instead of building castles, founding a nation, or doing something legendary for the textbooks, they chose to pick fights with the locals, get chased off the beach, and decide, nah, too many mosquitoes. Let's go back home and drink beer. And boom, one of the greatest discoveries in human history was completely forgotten just because these guys were too lazy to write it down and too busy being professional griefers in the Europe server. You heard that right. Columbus was just 500 years late with a better PR team. Welcome to the Medieval Archive. Today we're exposing the fail trip of the first Vikings to check in at America.
Everything started with a guy named Eric the Red. The name sounds prestigious, but actually, this guy was a legendary Bauthu troublemaker who got permabanned from the Norway server for shanking his neighbors over some petty drama. Salty about being kicked from the lobby, Eric moved to Iceland, but his toxic personality didn't change. He stabbed a few more people and got kicked out to sea again. Eric was like, "Fine, I'll make my own server." He sailed into the void and hit a massive frozen island. But to bait other noobs into moving there with him, he named it Greenland, making it sound like a lush paradise when it was actually just ice and sadness. The original clickbait king. In Eric's crew was a young tryhard named Leif Erikson, his son. Leif wasn't into the murder hobo lifestyle like his dad. He was an explorer. One day, Leif heard a merchant tell a story about seeing a strange land to the west after getting lost. Instead of being scared, Leif was like, "New map? Bet. I bet there's insane loot there." He gathered his day one bros, hopped on a wooden boat thin as a leaf, and charged into the Atlantic without Google Maps or a decent compass. The map back then was just black fog with the words, "Here be monsters," but Leif didn't care. He sailed past a land of rocks, Helluland, a land of forests, Markland, and finally stopped at a place he called Vinland because it was overflowing with grapes. Imagine a bunch of bearded, armored Vikings dancing around berries like kids in a candy store. A very delusional start for what would become the USA. After landing in Vinland, Leif and his squad entered God mode. The soil was rich. The salmon were as big as their thighs, and the grass was perfect for their cows to graze without any competition. Leif was like, "Yo, this server has low ping and infinite resources. This is our new base." They built some wooden shacks, partied hard, and enjoyed a long-term vacation. Leif's brother, Thorvald, was so confident he went for a stroll around the map to check the VAR, check the vibes. But the fun didn't last, because it turns out this server wasn't empty. While the Vikings were busy picking grapes, they bumped into the local players. Instead of using diplomacy or giving gifts, these Vikings, used to being outranked in Europe, chose to just shank the first people they saw. The admin of the America server, the native tribes, were like, "Oh, these bushy-bearded guys want to play dirty. Bet." And a massive brawl broke out. The peak of the comedy was when the Vikings met a group of natives in skin boats. The Norse warriors, usually proud of being the strongest in the world, panicked because of the strange sounds and weapons of their opponents. Legend says during one battle, Freydis, Leif's sister and a total girl boss, saw her bros about to rage quit and run away. She was pregnant at the time, but she was so tilted she grabbed a sword, beat her bare chest like a gorilla, and screamed at the top of her lungs. The natives saw a pregnant woman screaming for blood and thought, "Bro, this faction is glitched," and they backed off. The Vikings reached peak ego trip there, thinking they owned the place after one lucky win. But even the morale buff from Freydis couldn't carry this dangerous server. The Vikings started realizing a harsh truth. Wait, we're the guests. but the home team has way more players. Every time they went out to pick grapes or chop wood, a squad of native ninjas would jump out of the bushes and put an arrow in their butts. The locals didn't do fancy night duels. They played the guerrilla meta. And the Northmen started thinking this map was too hard. Probably a balance issue. Plus, our Baltus fell for an accidental scam. One time, the Vikings gave the natives cow milk, something Native Americans back then had never seen. The result? A bunch of locals got hit with lactose intolerance, cramping up and running for the bushes. They thought the Vikings were using dark magic or poison hacks to nerf them. The next morning, the entire native server showed up in massive numbers looking for justice. At this point, the legendary Vikings officially hit Alt plus F4. They looked around. The houses were trash, the food was a struggle, the neighbors were sweaty, and most importantly, home was way too far away without support from the mother server in Greenland. Thorfinn Karlsefni, the captain at the time, looked at his wounded bros and sighed. "Aight, boys, the feng shui here is bad. The land is 10 out of 10, but the owners are 0 out of 10. Let's head home." They packed their bags, left the wooden houses for the termites, and quietly rode away. A grand expedition ended in a collective rage quit because of a lack of manpower and fear of being bodied by the hosts. America was officially uninstalled from the Viking memory after just a few grape seasons. And so, after running away from the America server, the Vikings went back to Northern Europe and told stories that sounded like fantasy novels about a place called Vinland. But since there was no social media to post check-in photos or live stream, people just heard it and went, "Yeah, right. These guys are just drunk and yapping again." The maps of Vinland were tossed into dusty corners for 500 years, while the world remained convinced that the other side of the ocean was just a pit of sea monsters. It wasn't until 1492 that Christopher Columbus showed up in a rich kid suit with the backing of the Spanish royals. He landed, planted a flag, took selfies, wrote in a journal, and screamed to the world, "I found this place first!" All of Europe fell for it, honoring him as a legend, while Leif Erikson's ghost in Valhalla was probably like, "Bro, we found this half a millennium ago and nobody cares? Where's the justice?" The only difference between the Vikings and Columbus? The Vikings found America and left because too many mosquitoes and the hosts are too aggressive, while the Europeans later came back with guns, germs, and a brutal pay-to-win strategy. If our Viking bros had just been a bit more patient, or simply hadn't given the locals milk that gave them the runs, Americans might be speaking Norwegian and eating salted cod instead of hamburgers today. Moral of the story? Don't talk trash before checking the map. And if you find something great, remember to write it down, or at least don't annoy your neighbors with weird drinks. Thanks for watching the fail trip of the Vikings. If you think these bearded bros were hilarious, hit like, subscribe, and smash that bell for more historical troublemakers.